Delinquents attack a lady, but her dog does something that shocks everyone. Mrs. Cynthia lived in a small red brick house at the end of a quiet street on the outskirts of the city. She was a lady with silver hair and kind eyes always, with a ready smile for everyone who crossed her path, known and adored by her neighbors. Mrs. Cynthia was a central figure in the community, always willing to help with advice or a cup of hot tea. Her constant companion was Rex, a German shepherd with a shiny coat and attentive gaze. Rex was not just a guard dog, he was family to Mrs. Cynthia. At every step she took, Rex was by her side, both watchful and a friend, always alert for any sign of danger. The two had a special bond, built on a history that few knew. Rex had been adopted by Mrs. Cynthia a few years ago, found in an animal shelter. He was thin and scared, but something in his eyes touched the heart of the old lady. She knew that this dog had a strong spirit and that with love and care he could flourish. Since then, Rex had shown unwavering loyalty, protecting his owner from small dangers and bringing joy to her life. Mrs. Cynthia's routine was simple. Every morning she tended to her garden, chatted with neighbors, and took long walks with Rex around the neighborhood. During these walks, Rex always stayed vigilant, sniffing the air and observing the surroundings, ready to intervene if there was any threat. On that day, the sun shone brightly and the air was laden with suffocating heat. Mrs. Cynthia had gone out to shop at the local market, taking Rex with her as they walked back home, carrying bags full of fresh vegetables and warm bread. She didn't notice that she was being watched. Two men known in the neighborhood as the Incredible Bandits due to the audacity of their crimes were eyeing her. They had heard about the old lady who lived alone with her dog and decided she would be an easy target. Planning a quick robbery, they followed Mrs. Cynthia to her house, waiting for the right moment to strike. Upon arriving home, Mrs. Cynthia placed the bags in the kitchen and began putting away the groceries. Rex, as always, was by her side, but something was bothering him. He sniffed the air, his ears moving nervously. Suddenly, a muffled sound outside caught his attention. He growled softly, going to the front door and positioning himself protectively. Mrs. Cynthia, noticing Rex's uneasiness, went to the window to check before she could process what was happening. The door was violently kicked in and two masked men entered the house, pushing her to the ground. The shock was so great that she barely had time to scream. The bandits started searching the house, looking for anything of value. They laughed and exchanged taunts while Mrs. Cynthia, fallen on the floor, tried to gather herself, but Rex was not willing to let this happen. He lunged at the intruders, barking fiercely and baring his teeth. One of the bandits, surprised by the dog's reaction, tried to kick him, but Rex dodged and bit the salon arm hard. The man screamed in pain, cursing and trying to break free. The other bandit, seeing the situation, pulled a knife from his pocket and advanced towards Rex. Mrs. Cynthia, still on the ground, watched the scene with a racing heart. She knew Rex would fight to the end to protect her, but fear for her faithful companion consumed her. She tried to get up, but her knees trembled and the pain in her hip made movement difficult. Rex's bark echoed through the small house as he lunged at the second intruder. The knife-wielding man slashed wildly, but Rex was too quick. He darted to the side, avoiding the blade and clamping his jaws onto the man's leg. The man screamed, stumbling back and dropping the knife. Mrs. Cynthia, still on the floor, managed to pull herself up enough to lean against the wall. Her heart pounded with fear and desperation. Rex, be careful, she shouted, her voice trembling, but Rex was beyond hearing. He was in full protector mode, determined to drive these intruders away. The first man, nursing his bitten arm, grabbed a vase from a nearby table and hurled it at Rex. The heavy object missed by inches, shattering against the wall. Rex released his grip on the second man's leg and growled menacingly, his fur bristling. He positioned himself between Mrs. Cynthia and the two men, ready for whatever came next. The men, now clearly panicked, exchanged a quick glance. We need to get out of here, one of them muttered, but before they could make a move, Rex charged again, snapping at their heels. The men bolted for the door, stumbling over each other in their haste to escape. With the intruders gone, Rex returned to Mrs. Cynthia, who had finally managed to stand. She wrapped her arms around his neck, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, Rex, you saved me, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Rex licked her hand gently, his own way of reassuring her as the adrenaline began to wear off. Mrs. Cynthia sank into her favorite armchair, Rex at her feet. The room was a mess, but she was safe thanks to her loyal companion as she stroked Rex's head. Memories flooded back to her, memories of how Rex had come into her life and all the times he had protected her years ago after her husband passed away. Mrs. Cynthia felt an emptiness that seemed impossible to fill. Her daughter, concerned for her well-being, suggested she adopt a dog for companionship. Reluctantly, Mrs. Cynthia agreed and visited the local animal shelter. That's where she first saw Rex. Rex was different from the other dogs. He was quiet, reserved, and his eyes held a depth of sadness that spoke to her. The shelter worker told her that Rex had been found wandering the streets, malnourished and scared. There was something about him that tugged at her heartstrings, and she knew she had to take him home. From the day Rex entered her home, things began to change. His presence brought comfort and a sense of security. He would follow her everywhere, always vigilant, always ready to protect. There were times when he chased off stray cats that wandered too close or barked at suspicious noises in the night. Each time Rex proved his worth and deepened the bond they shared. One particular incident stood out in her mind. A few months after adopting Rex, Mrs. Cynthia had fallen in the garden, unable to get up. She called out, and within moments Rex was by her side, barking furiously, until a neighbor heard and came to help. It was then she realized just how much Rex understood and cared for her. Now, as she looked into his loyal eyes, she knew without a doubt that adopting Rex was one of the best decisions she had ever made. He wasn't just a pet, he was her guardian, her friend, and her hero. And today, once again, he had proven his unwavering loyalty and bravery. The night was unusually quiet as Mrs. Cynthia and Rex sat together, trying to find some semblance of calm after the harrowing events of the day. She had just started to drift off to sleep when a noise outside jolted her awake. Rex, ever vigilant, was already on his feet, ears perked and alert. Through the thin curtains, Mrs. Cynthia saw the shadows of the two men creeping around the side of the house. Her heart raced as she realized they had returned. This time they were determined to finish what they had started. Rex, we need to be ready, she whispered, her voice trembling but determined. Rex responded with a low growl, his muscles tense and ready for action. The front door rattled as the men tried to force it open again. This time, Mrs. Cynthia grabbed the phone and quickly dialed the police, explaining the situation in hushed tones. Please hurry, she urged before hanging up and turning her attention back to Rex. The door finally gave way with a loud crash, and the men burst in, their faces twisted with anger and frustration. Where is that damn dog? One of them snarled, clutching a metal pipe. They hadn't expected Rex to be ready for them. Rex launched himself at the intruders with ferocity that took them by surprise. He went straight for the man with a pipe, dodging the wild swings and sinking his teeth into the man's arm. The man screamed, dropping the pipe and trying to shake Rex off. The second man, panicked and desperate, backed away, fumbling with something in his pocket. Before he could react, Rex released his grip and charged at him, knocking him to the ground. The man's hand slipped out of his pocket, revealing a small knife that clattered to the floor. Mrs. Cynthia, watching the scene unfold, felt a surge of pride and fear. Hang on, Rex, she whispered, praying for the police to arrive soon. Rex continued his relentless assault, forcing the men to retreat towards the door. Just as it seemed Rex had the upper hand, the sound of sirens filled the air. The men, realizing they were out of time, scrambled to their feet and bolted out the door, Rex hot on their heels, until they disappeared into the darkness. Moments later, the police arrived, their flashing lights casting an eerie glow over the scene. Officers rushed in, guns drawn, but the immediate danger had passed. Rex stood at the doorway, panting heavily but unharmed, his eyes still fixed on the path the intruders had taken. Mrs. Cynthia sank into a chair, relief flooding through her as she recounted the events to the officers. They assured her they would do everything in their power to catch the men and ensure her safety. As the police secured the house and took statements, neighbors began to gather outside, drawn by the commotion. Word of Rex's bravery spread quickly, and soon the small crowd was buzzing with admiration for the loyal dog. One of the officers, after inspecting the scene, approached Mrs. Cynthia. Ma'am, your dog is incredible. He protected you bravely. We'll make sure you're safe, but you have one remarkable guardian here. Mrs. Cynthia looked down at Rex, who was now sitting calmly at her feet and smiled through her tears. "Yes, I know he's my hero," she said softly, reaching down to stroke his head. In the days that followed, Mrs. Cynthia's house became a symbol of bravery in the neighborhood. Friends and neighbors visited frequently, bringing food and offering help with repairs. Rex was treated like a local hero, receiving treats and pats from everyone who came by. The bond between Mrs. Cynthia and Rex only grew stronger after that night. She knew that no matter what challenges came their way, they would face them together. Rex had proven time and again that his loyalty and courage were boundless, and for that Mrs. Cynthia was eternally grateful. As the sun set on another day, Mrs. Cynthia sat on her porch with Rex by her side, reflecting on the events that had unfolded. She knew they had been through a terrifying ordeal, but she also knew that with Rex beside her she could face anything. Together they watched the neighborhood settle into the peaceful evening, knowing that their unbreakable bond had only grown stronger. The days turned into weeks and life gradually returned to normal for Mrs. Cynthia and Rex. The neighborhood remained abuzz with the tale of Rex's heroics, and the old woman and her loyal dog became local legends. Children would often ask their parents to pass by Mrs. Cynthia's house just to catch a glimpse of the brave dog who had saved his beloved owner. Mrs. Cynthia, ever the gracious hostess, welcomed visitors with open arms. She would recount the story of that fateful night with a mix of pride and gratitude, always emphasizing the bravery and loyalty of Rex. For Rex, every visitor was a new friend, and he basked in the attention and affection, always remaining alert and protective. One sunny afternoon, Mrs. Cynthia sat on her porch, Rex lying contentedly at her feet. A soft breeze rustled the leaves of the old oak tree in her front yard. She gazed out at the neighborhood, reflecting on everything that had happened. The fear and danger of that night seemed a distant memory, replaced by the warmth and security of the present. Her thoughts turned to the lessons she had learned in Rex. She had found not just a pet but a protector, a companion, and a true friend. His unwavering loyalty and courage had taught her the depths of an animal's love and the extraordinary bond that can form between humans and their pets. She thought about the importance of adopting animals in need, knowing that Rex had come into her life from a place of abandonment and fear, only to become her greatest protector. Mrs. Cynthia knew that their story carried a message for everyone. It was a story of resilience, trust, in the incredible things that can happen when you open your heart to love. She hoped that those who heard their story would be inspired to look beyond the surface, to see the potential for greatness in every creature, and to understand the profound impact of compassion and care. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the neighborhood, Mrs. Cynthia looked down at Rex and smiled. "You know, Rex, you've shown me what true bravery looks like. You're not just my dog, you're my hero," she said, her voice filled with affection. Rex lifted his head and looked at her with his soulful eyes, as if understanding every word. He inched closer, resting his head on her lap, his presence a constant reminder of the love and protection he offered. The days ahead were filled with peace and a deeper sense of connection. Mrs. Cynthia continued to care for her garden, take her walks, and enjoy the company of her neighbors, always with Rex by her side. Their bond, forged in moments of crisis and strengthened by daily acts of love, was unbreakable in the quiet moments of the evening. As Mrs. Cynthia sat with Rex, watching the world go by, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. She knew that no matter what challenges the future held, she and Rex would face them together, and that was all the assurance she needed. The story of Mrs. Cynthia and Rex spread beyond their neighborhood, touching the hearts of many and inspiring acts of kindness and bravery. It was a testament to the power of love and the extraordinary bond between a woman and her dog, a story that would be remembered and cherished for years to come.